Robert Fico survived 5 bullets in 2024 because he refused to support Ukraine policy. 2 years later, same man, same policy. He is now being investigated for treason. Not by a court, not by an international body, by a complaint filed by a 5% party that somehow mobilized 13,000 signatures in 72 hours for the crime of turning off emergency electricity to Ukraine, because Ukraine stopped delivering oil to Slovakia. No oil for us, no electricity for you. That is not treason. That is reciprocity. And Brussels knows the difference, which is why the timing of the investigation tells you everything the content of it does not. 14 days before the Hungarian election, 3 scandals in 6 days against Orbán, and now a treason charge against the one man who publicly said, if Orbán loses, Slovakia takes the veto. This is not a coincidence. This is a pincer movement. And nobody in mainstream media is drawing the map. Here is the full picture. Let's go. To understand what is happening right now, you need to understand one number. 90 billion euros. That is the loan package. 60 billion of it for weapons that the EU wants to send to Ukraine, financed through joint European debt. Orbán has blocked it. Fico has backed the blockade. Together, 2 countries representing roughly 40 million people have stopped the entire financial machinery of the European Union from moving 90 billion euros into a war zone. That is the context. Everything else flows from that number. Now let's look at what happened in the 6 days before this video was made, because the sequence is not random. It is a schedule. March 22nd. The Washington Post publishes a report claiming that Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó spent years leaking EU secrets to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The sourcing: anonymous intelligence officials. A claimed Russian memo described as verified. No documents published. No names attached. Anonymous officials. Verified by whom? Not specified. March 24th. A former Hungarian police officer goes public claiming that Hungarian intelligence services are actively sabotaging Peter Magyar's Teaser Party campaign. The video reaches 2 million YouTube views within days. The claim: state apparatus directly interfering in the opposition's organizing capacity. March 26th. The EU formally freezes Hungary's 16 billion euro defense credit under the SAFE program. Hungary is the only country among 19 applicants whose defense plan was not approved. 18 approved. 1 rejected. The EU diplomat's explanation, given on record: it is difficult to release billions to Orbán when he is violating the principle of loyal cooperation. Loyal cooperation. That phrase is doing enormous work. In EU treaty language, it means member states must work together in good faith. In practice, as applied here, it means if you use your legal veto right to block something Brussels wants, you are being disloyal. The veto is in the treaty. The loyalty obligation is also in the treaty. Brussels has decided one overrides the other. Is decided which one. Same day. March 26th. Slovak police, they have opened a formal treason investigation against Prime Minister Robert Fico. 3 scandals in 6 days. The wiretapping story, the intelligence sabotage claim, the defense credit freeze, and the treason charge. All of them against the 2 men blocking 90 billion euros. All of them in the 14 days before April 12th. Not one German newspaper. Not one French outlet. Not one Belgian broadcaster asked the timing question. They reported each event in its own box, separately, without connection, without the map. Now let's look at Fico specifically, because his situation is the key that unlocks the entire strategy. The formal complaint against Fico was filed by Branislav Grilling, leader of the Freedom and Solidarity Party, a liberal opposition movement that polls at approximately 5% in Slovakia. The complaint accuses Fico not just of treason, but of abuse of office, inhumane conduct, and terrorism. For cutting emergency electricity transfers to a neighboring country that stopped delivering oil. 13,000 citizens signed in support of the complaint. That is a significant number for 72 hours of mobilization. It requires infrastructure. It requires coordination. It requires funding. A 5% party does not have that infrastructure organically. The question of who provided it has not been asked in any major Western outlet. Fico himself stated publicly, before the investigation was announced, that he was watching what was happening in Hungary and he wanted to warn against attempts to contest the election results on an international level. He said, "I see what is happening, and I want to warn against such attempts." He named it before it was confirmed. And then he said something else. Something that explains why Brussels needs him neutralized at the same time as Orbán, he said. And this was explicit, that if Orbán loses the April 12th election, Slovakia will take over the veto against the 90 billion euro package. Read that sentence with the treason investigation in mind. If the EU strategy is to wait for Orbán's electoral defeat to unlock the 90 billion, and Fico has publicly announced he will pick up the veto the moment Orbán puts it down, then removing Orbán alone solves nothing. Both men have to go, one through the ballot box, the other through the courthouse. One hand removes the first, the other hand criminalizes the second. And at the end of it, nobody holds a veto anymore. That is not a coincidence of events. That is a plan with two parallel tracks running simultaneously. And the EU's own strategic communications outlet, Euractiv, wrote it openly. The EU leadership is privately counting on the Hungarian elections on April 12th to resolve Orbán's blockade of the €90 billion credit package. The consensus strategy is now focused on waiting for Hungarian voters to potentially remove Orbán from power, waiting for voters to remove a leader. Openly, as a policy, published in the EU's own aligned media. And waiting, apparently, is not enough on its own. Because if Fico stands ready to catch the veto, waiting for Orbán's defeat just delays the problem by 48 hours. So the waiting strategy runs alongside the legal strategy. Remove one man from office. Remove the other man's credibility and freedom simultaneously. Now let's look at one more element that nobody is discussing. Because Brussels did not just prepare the political and legal tracks, it prepared the information track as well. On March 16th, before any of the scandals broke, before the wiretapping story, before the intelligence sabotage claim, before the defense credit freeze, before the treason investigation, the European Union activated the rapid response mechanism under the Digital Services Act, specifically for the Hungarian election. Under this mechanism, funded NGOs and fact-checkers can flag content for accelerated moderation and removal. The censorship infrastructure was built before there was anything to censor. The mechanism was in place before the stories that would need moderation existed. The timeline runs in one direction only. First the infrastructure, then the scandals, then the moderation. That is not a reactive system. That is a pre-positioned operation. Fico called it directly. He said the attempt to internationally contest the Hungarian election results was already being prepared. He named it as a warning before it was visible. A man who survived 5 bullets for this position does not use the word warning casually. Now let's talk about the pipeline. Because underneath every financial number, every legal charge, every intelligence claim, there is one physical object that explains everything: the Druzhba pipeline, carrying Russian oil through Ukrainian territory into Slovakia and Hungary. Ukraine says it was damaged by a Russian drone strike in late January. Hungary and Slovakia say the damage evidence does not support that conclusion. Fico produced satellite imagery he claims contradicts the drone strike narrative. An independent inspection of the pipeline, requested by both Hungary and Slovakia, offered to be funded by the EU Commission, has not happened. Because Ukraine has not granted security clearance to the inspection team. The pipeline is broken. The inspection is blocked by the country that benefits from it staying broken. And the two countries that need the oil are being called disloyal for noticing. Hungary gets 45% of its gas imports from Ukraine. The Slovak grid operator formally terminated the emergency electricity agreement with Ukraine on March 16th. Orbán announced on March 25th that Hungary will begin diverting gas from Ukrainian transit and storing it in Hungarian reserves instead. 45% of Ukraine's gas imports from Hungary at risk. 40% of Ukraine's electricity. We covered this last week. Routing through Hungarian territory. These are not political positions. These are physical infrastructure facts. And Brussels has no treaty mechanism to compel Hungary or Slovakia to operate energy infrastructure in service of a country that stopped delivering oil and blocked an independent pipeline inspection. So instead of addressing the pipeline, Brussels addressed the politicians. Freeze the defense credit. Open the treason investigation. Activate the moderation infrastructure. Run the wiretapping story. Publish the intelligence sabotage claim. The pipeline is still broken. The inspection is still blocked. And the political leaders who noticed are now facing criminal charges and frozen funding. Let's look at what Orbán said when he was asked about all of this at the EU summit last week. He was direct. He said, "If there is oil, there will be money." 5 words. Clearer than anything produced in hours of summit discussion. The condition is physical and specific. It is not ideological. It is not anti-Ukrainian. It is, fix the pipeline, allow the inspection, restore the oil, and Hungary will release the funding. Brussels has not responded to those 5 words with a counterproposal. It has responded with frozen defense credits, wiretapping stories, and an activated censorship mechanism. Now let's bring this to where it lands for everyone watching from outside Hungary and Slovakia. Because this story is not about 2 small countries on the eastern edge of the EU. This is a test. And the test has a clear question. Can the EU use financial pressure, legal instruments, intelligence operations, and information infrastructure to remove 2 democratically elected governments who are using legal treaty rights to block a spending decision? If the answer is yes. If Orbán loses on April 12th, and Fico is neutralized through the Slovak courts, and the 90 billion flows without a veto, then Brussels has a blueprint. Scandal campaign plus credit freeze plus treason charge plus censorship infrastructure equals regime change without military force. Legal, deniable, effective. And then the question becomes, who is next? Which government, in which country, will use its treaty rights in a way that Brussels finds inconvenient? And how many of the tools deployed against Orbán and Fico will be ready and waiting when that moment comes? German Chancellor Friedrich Merz called Orbán's veto a serious disloyalty and proposed abolishing the unanimity principle. He said it in Brussels, surrounded by agreement. But the unanimity principle protects Germany too. On migration. on debt, on military spending, on any future decision where Berlin finds itself in the minority. The instrument being built to defeat Orbán's veto does not disappear after April 12th. It becomes the template. And the country that helped build it will one day find itself on the other side of it. Fico warned about exactly this, 2 years after surviving an assassination attempt for his political positions. Now facing treason charges for the same positions, he said, "I see what is happening. I want to warn against it." He is not warning about Hungary. He is warning about what comes after Hungary. Mainstream media is giving you the individual headlines, the wiretapping story, the defense credit freeze, the treason investigation, each one separate, each one in its own frame. Put them in the same frame and the picture is unmistakable. 2 men, 2 countries, 90 billion euros, 1 pincer movement, 14 days before the vote. The double trap nobody saw coming, except the 2 men standing inside it. Subscribe. April 12th is not just a Hungarian election. It is a test of whether the EU's new toolkit works. And you will want to know the result the moment it comes in.